But back to this verdict here, not guilty. This juror, B37, mother of 2 adult children, married for 20 years. She has now reversed one decision, writing a book on her experience deliberating the Zimmerman case. We're hearing she's now choosing against that. And she changed her mind in the hours after she gave CNN's Anderson Cooper an exclusive sit-down interview. Here's one of the most telling moments of that night.
His life was going to be taken away from him, or he was going to have bodily harm. He had a right. Well, that's how we read the law. That's how we got to the point of everybody being not guilty.
Whether it was George Zimmerman getting out of the vehicle, whether he was right to get out of the vehicle, whether he was a wannabe cop, whether he was overeager, none of that in the final analysis mattered. What mattered was those seconds before the shot went off. Did George Zimmerman fear for his life?
Exactly. That's exactly what happened.
And that is just one piece of an incredibly compelling interview that Anderson conducted. We will replay the entire sit-down interview with Juror B37 for you next hour. Do not miss that, beginning at the top of the hour. But first, I want to get to just some legal analysis here based upon what the juror told Anderson last night. Joining me now, 2 legal minds, criminal defense attorneys Darren Kavanoki and Tanya Miller. So welcome back to both of you. Darren, you get to kick things off because all of this talk about, Zimmerman getting out of the car and following this teenager, it sounds like from this juror, what it really came down to were those final moments when Zimmerman felt threatened. Do you think that was because the case or the evidence was weak, or because the defense did a really great job?
Well, I think both of those things were a factor. I think the prosecution made some critical missteps in their presentation of the case, the most grievous of which was choosing to play Zimmerman's interviews early on, relatively speaking, in their case, which removed the need for Zimmerman himself to take the stand and removed any opportunity for them to do a vigorous cross-examination, which would have cleaned up some of the mistakes that happened early on in the investigation. But, this was a case with so many opportunities, so many times, I should say, when the prosecution snatched defeat from what could have been the jaws of victory.
I want to get back to sort of this point you're making, also just about multiple witnesses. It seemed like the defense continued to win, even though they were state witnesses. We'll want to play a little more sound in a moment. But Tanya, what was your biggest takeaway?
Well, my biggest takeaway was that she seemed to completely identify with George Zimmerman. She was completely sympathetic to George Zimmerman and really didn't express very much sympathy toward Trayvon Martin. I was surprised to hear her say that Trayvon Martin was just as responsible for his own death as George Zimmerman was when Trayvon Martin was an unarmed teenager walking home, and it was George Zimmerman who got out of the car, confronted him, and ultimately shot him in the heart with that 9mm handgun.
It was Anderson who asked, do you feel sympathy for, or did you feel sympathy for Trayvon Martin? And she never said yes. She just actually said both. I feel sympathy for both. And I think it really, it's shocking, I know, to a number of people, but I think a lot of this gets down to the jurors. Darren, to your point, believing Zimmerman with the, the police interrogation videos they played, that the crime scene walkthrough, as you mentioned, he never took the stand over, much of the prosecution evidence. Let me play another snippet. Again, this is Juror B37.
I think George Zimmerman is a man whose heart was in the right place, but just got displaced by the vandalism in the neighborhoods and wanting to catch these people so badly that he went above and beyond what he really should have done.
So let's continue. You hear her say, I feel like there's this acknowledgement that what he did was wrong. He should perhaps not have followed Trayvon Martin, but ultimately it came down to self-defense.
But look, Brooke, when she says his heart was in the right place, let's be clear, because Twitter has actually blown up on me on this one point. Yeah. I believe what she is referring to is the neighborhood watch activity, that his heart was in the right place in terms of wanting to keep his neighborhood safe. But one of the most, to my mind, one of the really glaring legal errors is that she bootstrapped that to Detective Serino's testimony, that she found him credible, that Serino found George Zimmerman believable and truthful, and that was something the judge specifically told the jurors to disregard, and yet that came out in her interview as being something important about Zimmerman and the jurors' findings about his credibility.
Well, here you have this lead detective in this case, right? I mean, and this person ultimately, in the end, seemed to be testifying more on behalf of the defense. We were all watching, right, the state's witness that day, and we're sort of blown away. And the idea, Tanya, that the jurors could just go home and scrub that from their minds is kind of impossible.
Yes, I mean, that's why you always say it's very difficult to unring a bell once it's been rung. I mean, you asked the jury to disregard what they heard, but that was really egregious testimony on behalf of this detective who should have, frankly, known better than to vouch for the credibility of a defendant. Detectives can't ordinarily say, I believe the defendant is a liar. They certainly know that they can't say, I believe the defendant is telling the truth.
Darren Kavanoki, we'll see you at the end of next hour after we play this entire Juror B37 interview. We can post-game that a little bit. Tanya Miller, thank you very much. Coming up next.